Welcome to the Mind Vine podcast, where we challenge the stigma associated with mental illness through conversations about a variety of issues impacting mental health. Here we bring you news, views, and interviews that intrigue, educate, and celebrate recovery. Leading us on this journey are the hosts of the Mind Vine podcast, Darryl Mathers and Chris Bovie.
So welcome to the Mind Vine podcast. My name is Darryl Mathers. I usually have a co-host, but Chris Bovie, but I'm flying solo today, which I think is actually to your benefit, in my opinion. But I'm just kidding. But we're at the Mental Health for All conference here, hosted by the Canadian Mental Health Association. We've been here all week interviewing a series of guests related to presentations they've been doing on mental health. And today we're continuing that conversation with Chantal and Katrina Shaw from CMHA Calgary. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being on the Mind Vine podcast.
Thanks for having us.
So I'd like to start off just by maybe you could tell us a little bit about your presentation that you made earlier this week.
You want to take it away, Katrina?
Sure. So what we did was at CMHA, we have a suicide bereavement program, and that is adult specific. So it is all for survivors of suicide, someone who has lost someone to suicide. And as we kind of looked at the resources in the city in Calgary, there was not anything really provided for youth. So we decided as a program and an agency that it would be beneficial to create a youth focus group for that age group to go through the grieving process in that took into consideration the developmental differences than adults. So what we have done for the summer is basically create a whole program, a whole group, and we created a manual and backed it by theory and research, and then that's what we chose to present on when we were here. And we basically gave the audience sort of a mini manual and an outline of things to consider if they ever wanted to sort of also pick this up at a different part of Canada and also kind of spread this initiative, I guess. Yeah. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, definitely. And like Katrina said, it really does seem to be a gap when it comes to the clinical work and the literature. There are grief groups out there for youth, but this one is very unique just based on the fact that it's going to be for youth who have lost loved ones to suicide, which we know is can be a very different and more complicated grieving process for a lot of reasons.
So you mentioned that you conduct a lot of research in in developing your program. What does the research tell you that young people need when they're going through something like that?
Young people definitely, what we know is they need that support. They need that open space, that safe environment where they can explore all those things just like an adult would, right? All those why questions around suicide. Why did this happen? Why did my loved one take their life? What was going on for them, and a place where they can really process all those intense emotions. We know that adolescence is a time too that's very challenging, right? It's met with a lot of changes. Youth are kind of trying to figure out who they are, that sense of self, and I think as adults it's really our responsibility to kind of guide them when they're in that stage of grieving. And unfortunately, I think as a society we almost ignore grieving because it's painful, right? It kind of feels like it feels better sometimes to just sweep it under the carpet and to say things like, let's just move forward. But we know the only way to work through it is to process it. So I think as adults we need to kind of be that role model for youth and tell them that it's okay and you actually need to work through this.
And I think one other thing is sort of the complexity of suicide. There's a lot of stigma around it, but there's also a lot of fear. And so I think parents are afraid to talk to youth about it because they're afraid it'll plant a seed or that it'll scare them in or that they'll have their own suicide ideation. And there's really this sort of avoidance of talking about it. And so if a youth has lost someone to suicide, often people believe I have to protect them. So like I need to kind of keep things secure, or I need to avoid telling them the truth, when really the research that's out there right now is saying no, they need to know like clear, honest, what happened, easy language, easy to process, and they need to be given a space to ask questions and to talk about like fears of death or future incidences happening, those kinds of things.
I think in the recent history of society, we've kind of downplayed the emotional experience of youth in those situations, right? Like, I remember as a child when something like that would happen, like suicide, you would get like zero information, right? Like, they're sick, or you would never get an explanation as to why. And I think we sometimes look at what youth are going through, maybe not any longer, but certainly when I was a kid. And you think, oh, they're flexible, they're young, you're young, you don't need to worry about that kind of stuff. And we expect them just to overcome these things just because they're youth and they don't have maybe that lived experience that we do as adults. Would you find that in your when your research or when you were going through this program, that we need to start valuing these youth experiences a bit more?
Oh yeah, most definitely. And that kind of goes to what you're saying, where there is kind of this mentality that, youth, they're just going to bounce back. They're resilient, and yes, I believe all those things are true. But at the end of the day, they're human beings, right? And when they experience a loss, it significantly impacts them too. And there's a lot of other factors, kind of like we already said, that complicate the grieving process for them. The fact that they're going through a lot of hormonal, physical changes. The fact that those frontal lobes aren't fully developed. They don't have a ton of life experience to draw from. So I think that really makes it essential for adults, professionals, support systems to really step up and just kind of open up that conversation. And
where do you think they get a lot of their ideas about suicide? Media?
Yeah.
Social media?
Totally.
Yeah, there's lots of sort of criticisms, I think, now about how suicide has become a bit glorified, right? And they have to be more mindful of that, I think, in reporting, because youth get attracted to the glorification of suicide. And it can quickly exasperate ideas of, fame around doing something, or, this is a way to get noticed. And they might not actually be attached to the finality of suicide, right? They're more attached to the glorification of it and how this might help them get noticed.
Mm-hmm. When you think of something like 13 Reasons Why, and that was an interesting period because, in case anybody hasn't seen it, it's a show on Netflix about teen suicide and how she commits suicide but leaves tapes for people that she feels is responsible, and the entire show is kind of everybody wondering what's going to be on their tape, so to speak. But it was an interesting time to be in mental health because you had schools sending out letters saying, don't let your kids watch this, and you had other people saying, we should be talking, at least we're talking about it, right? It's an opportunity to talk about it. And I find when it comes to suicide and young people, we're not all on the same page, right? Like you look at that, the 13 Reasons Why example, and you have people, even, professionals in mental health on two different sides of that argument. Would you agree? Or
yeah, I would totally agree. And I actually did watch the series right away and actually a client brought it to my attention. And I believe after watching it, there are definitely pros and cons to it. So I'm kind of on the fence with it. I think the real benefits of that show is it was a catalyst for opening up that discussion, like you said, around not only suicide, but sexual assault, bullying, mental health, mental illness in general. That being said, I think there were lots of cons. As someone who works in the field, I myself found a lot of the scenes quite graphic and disturbing. So I know that a youth who may be struggling would definitely likely find those scenes quite disturbing as well. And kind of like you said, and Katrina as well, it really it's a dramatization, right? And it kind of made it seem like, okay, these are the 13 reasons why I'm taking my life, and this is a reasonable option. And it kind of made it seem like this is a reasonable option. From a bereavement perspective, I don't think it's was helpful in the recovery process for those who watched it. I know for my clients especially, they said because, Hannah's tapes almost said, because of people's behaviors, things people have done, these are the reasons I'm taking my life. I know a lot of my clients said, wow, that really kind of fueled that guilt in me even more and kind of brought that to the forefront. So,
And the show kind of presents it as she lives in death,
yeah.
right? And when it doesn't really capture the finality of death.
So
right?
true.
Yeah.
So true.
When just getting back to your program, just given the complexities of youth mental health, suicide, bereavement, I'm wondering what kind of reaction you're getting from people as you're getting close to maybe rolling this out or having people adopt the program. Are people welcoming it, or what's the reaction been?
I think there's a couple of things. Like, people are excited because there's not a lot of resources for youth. And we've certainly had parents in our adult groups say, like, do you guys offer things for youth? And that's kind of what sparked our idea of we need to fill this gap. So certainly people are excited. But I also think there is some, I don't know if it's fear or hesitation, but there's, I think, concern about just the parental role for this. Like, I can imagine what it would be like to be a parent and see my child grieving and not really know how or what to do. And I think the grieving process is so foreign sometimes. It can be, a youth having behaviors all of a sudden or being extremely angry. There's sort of this panic of something's wrong. Like, my child is not in a good place and they're not grieving well and stuff, whereas we would actually encourage that and be like, that is healthy grieving, right? So it's more, I think there's going to have to be a lot of education as well, and involving maybe doing a couple parent sessions just so that people don't feel in the dark and that everybody can start to be more on the same page. Do you agree, Chantal?
Yeah.
Definitely.
So if anybody wants to learn more about your initiative and any resources you have, where can they find you, or where should they go?
Yeah, so they can definitely go to the CMHA Calgary website. We haven't advertised as of yet because our hope is actually to partner with the schools, and we're hoping to launch this in the new year. So we really want to partner with the schools, get the schools on board. Katrina and I feel, based on all of our research, that it would be really beneficial for schools to be involved as well. And to do it during school time, so youth have that support after our group session as well, not just from us, but maybe from school counselors, teachers, people around them.
And something like this, that buy-in is essential, right? Like, you can have the best program in the world, and if you don't have the buy-in from the organizations that house these kids, it's going to be very difficult to have the impact that you want, I guess, right?
Definitely. So that's why we kind of have to sort of put ourselves out there too. We were hoping to maybe go to different classrooms, kind of pitch the group to the youth, maybe just have an open discussion like this about things like 13 Reasons Why, things they've seen in the media, messages they've heard around death and suicide, so they can kind of get to know us a little bit, right? Because I think for youth, they have to feel too like, okay, these adults, they can tell when an adult isn't genuinely interested or doesn't genuinely care about them and their stories. So I think that there has to be that buy-in from the youth, and then as well, whoever we're partnering with.
I think when it comes, I empathize with young people today because I feel like they have, they live in an era where there's information everywhere, but there's also misinformation everywhere. And in the age of social media, I think it's really difficult for kids to process certain things as they're entering adulthood. So I think something like this sounds because I remember when things would happen in school, and it's like, they might bring in a counselor to deal with the immediate trauma or the incident, and then that might be it, right? But something like this where a suicide impacts so many people, even and it could impact somebody that may not even have known that person. Right? But just being in that school environment, I think there's the potential there to have, to really address an issue before it becomes a larger issue. So it sounds like a great program. Thank you very much. Thank you both very much for being on the podcast, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you
so much, Darryl.
Yeah, thank you.
You guys are great.
Awesome.